Hello, my name is Phil Flambus. I've been researching, writing and rewriting a book on Plato's descriptions of Atlantis for about 10 years. I have worked as a doctor for over 40 years and recently retired from medical practice. I also have a Master of Business Administration, or MBA, and have worked in hospital administration as an equities analyst and as a management consultant. The book is called Plato's Caribbean Atlantis, and this set of 3 videos is based on the book's conclusions. In about 360 BC, the Greek philosopher Plato wrote 2 works about Atlantis. They are called the Timaeus and Critias. These 2 documents are the only surviving written accounts of the prehistoric civilization, island and empire of Atlantis. If you want to know exactly what Plato wrote about Atlantis, you should read English translations of the relevant first part of the Timaeus and all of the Critias. The translations are readily available on the internet. This set of 3 videos presents a new location for the island of Atlantis. It is based entirely on Plato's descriptions in the Timaeus and Critias. The first video argues that Plato did not make up his story of Atlantis, and he firmly believed that Atlantis existed. The second video gives Plato's general details about the location and nature of the island of Atlantis. The third and final video gives an exact location for the island of Atlantis and describes it in detail. It would be best if most of you forget anything you previously read, saw or heard about Atlantis. If Plato does not describe it, ignore it. In the Timaeus and Critias, Plato describes the Atlanteans as an aggressive imperial military power that existed more than 11,000 years ago. The Atlantean civilization was based on a large island located in the Atlantic Ocean. From their island base, the Atlanteans created an empire into the neighbouring continent. Eventually, the Atlanteans expanded their empire and entered the Mediterranean, conquering and enslaving the native Western Mediterranean cultures. In the north, the Atlanteans reached as far as Italy. In the south, they reached as far as Egypt. The Atlanteans then attempted to further expand their empire by conquering the native cultures in the eastern Mediterranean. The remaining free Mediterranean people defeated the Atlanteans in a war that drove the Atlanteans entirely from the Mediterranean region. Sometime after the war in the Mediterranean, the Atlanteans' home island sank into the sea during devastating earthquakes and floods. Plato also describes the details of a prehistoric Athenian society that fought in the war against the Atlanteans, but was itself destroyed by earthquakes and floods. In the past, many people have tried to find a single explanation for Atlantis. However, they usually looked at only a small portion of what Plato described. They then tried to cram a small part of his complete description into a particular place or time. Some proposed sites for Atlantis include Santorini and Cyprus in the Mediterranean, the Black Sea, Northwest Africa, southern Spain, the Canary and Azores Islands, the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, Greenland, the Bahamas, the Americas, the submerged landmass of Sundaland in Southeast Asia, and even Antarctica. This video will need to debunk some previous theories to clear the path for the most likely location for Plato's Atlantis. The 2 main questions this video answers are: did Plato believe what he wrote about Atlantis was a true story? And where was the great island Plato described? All modern scholars of Plato believe he made up the whole Atlantis story. They say that he used the story as a metaphor for his political arguments and that none of it is true. They say that Plato occasionally used myths in his dialogues, and the Atlantis story is one of those myths. They say that Plato may have referred to past events and catastrophes nearer his time. The academics say Plato used a noble lie, something that Plato says is true but was made up to prove an argument. When modern academics believe these opinions, they can ignore the entire Atlantis story. They never have to think about whether the Atlantis story is true. In the Timaeus and Critias, Plato writes several times that all of the detail in the Atlantis story is fact and not a myth. This video will show that Plato could not have made up the entire Atlantis story. Apart from Plato stating it is true, it contains far too much detail about Atlantis and prehistoric Athens just to prove an argument. The best place to start Plato's Atlantis story is to describe 3 Greek men. All of them were important figures in the history of ancient Athens. These three men were real people with personal histories documented when they were alive. They are the philosopher Plato himself, his teacher Socrates, and the lawmaker and statesman Solon. It may be best to begin with Socrates, who was born in Athens around 469 BC. In a way, if it weren't for Socrates, there may not have been a Plato. Socrates was born into what would now be called a working-class family. His father was a stonemason, his mother was a midwife. Socrates worked briefly as a stonemason before teaching philosophy. Socrates did not write any works himself. He is known through the accounts of several later classical writers, mainly his student Plato. These writers' works became known as Socratic dialogues, where characters discuss moral and philosophical problems. The dialogues are constructed like a play, where Socrates is often the principal character. The Socrates character employs Socratic method, while he questions the views and beliefs of the other characters of the dialogue. Ideas are questioned, and those ideas with contradictions are eliminated, leaving behind better ideas. In 399 BC, at the age of about 70, Socrates was tried and convicted on two charges related to his teaching in Athens: impiety and corrupting Athenian youth. He was sentenced to death and was executed by drinking a poison of hemlock-based liquid. Socrates had the option to escape, but continue with his death penalty rather than betray his convictions. It is difficult to describe Plato's influence on Western thought in just a few words. With his teacher Socrates and his student Aristotle, Plato laid the foundations of all later Western philosophy and science. Plato was born into an aristocratic Athenian family in about 428 BC. Unlike the working-class Socrates, Plato would have studied grammar, music, and gymnastics when he was a youth. Plato also attended courses of philosophy before meeting Socrates and becoming his student. Soon after Socrates was convicted and put to death in 399 BC, Plato left Athens at the age of about 28. He travelled in the Eastern Mediterranean for about 12 years, studying with the philosophers of his day. Unlike Socrates, Plato was both a writer and a teacher. Plato began writing Socratic dialogues soon after the death of Socrates. He continued to write until his death at the age of about 80, around 347 BC. Plato wrote for about 50 years in the form of Socratic dialogues, with Socrates as the principal speaker. He never introduced himself into any of the dialogues. Plato's Timaeus and Critias writings about Atlantis are just 2 of 36 surviving dialogues that we can still read in the original Greek. The Timaeus and Critias dialogues are 2 of his later works, written toward the end of his life. On returning to Athens, Plato founded the Academy in about 387 BC. It was located in a sacred grove on the outskirts of Athens. The Academy became the first institution of higher learning in the Western world. The Academy's reputation was such that Greek scholars from all parts of the Greek world would attend the school. For instance, Aristotle studied there for 20 years before starting his own philosophical school, the Lyceum. Plato was the head of the school for 40 years. The school did not have any particular doctrine to teach in Plato's time. Plato and his other associates posed problems for students to study and solve using the Socratic method. Following Plato's death in about 348 BC, the Academy continued for over 260 years until coming to an end in 83 BC. Solon was an Athenian statesman, lawmaker, and poet. He lived from about 638 BC until 558 BC. Solon died about 130 years before Plato was born. He is best known for making laws against the political, economic, and moral decline in Athens. After instituting those laws, Solon left Athens and travelled for 10 years to prevent the Athenians from repealing any of his laws. Solon first stayed in Egypt around 570 BC. According to the Greek historian Herodotus, Solon visited the Egyptian capital city of Sais in the Nile Delta. While Solon was in Sais, he spoke there with the pharaoh Amasis. Solon must have been considered a very important person to have a private audience with the Egyptian pharaoh. According to the Greek historian Plutarch, Solon discussed philosophy with 2 Egyptian senior temple priests, Xenophus of Heliopolis and Sonchis of Sais. In Plato's Timaeus and Critias, Solon visited the temple of Neith at Sais and was told the Atlantis story by the priests there. The Egyptian priests showed Solon their written ancient records about the Atlantis story. Solon had the Atlantis story translated from Egyptian into Greek and returned to Greece with the written translation. In the Timaeus dialogue, the Critias character tells Socrates, "The original writing, which is still in my possession and was carefully studied by me when I was a child." Plato was a relative of Critias and a distant relative of Solon. Because Plato quotes such a large amount of precise detail about Atlantis, he must have had access to Solon's original written translation. Plato's intellectual hero Socrates favoured truth as the highest value. Socrates argued that truth could be discovered through reason and logic in discussion. However, in the Timaeus and Critias dialogues, Plato never has Socrates question any of the facts of the Atlantis story. Plato repeatedly writes that the Atlantis story is not a myth. He writes, "Then listen, Socrates, to a tale which, though strange, is certainly true, having been attested by Solon. And you speak well, but what is this ancient achievement which was not only actually related by Solon, but was once really accomplished by this city? And what that event was which Solon asserted as a fact? And if unintentionally I have said anything wrong, I pray that he will impose upon me a just retribution, and the just retribution of him who errs is that he should be set right." Some of Plato's other quotes on philosophy, truth, and reality show how unlikely it would be for him to completely fabricate a story and try to pass it off as a factual account. He will never willingly tolerate an untruth, but will hate it as much as he loves truth. And is there anything more closely connected with wisdom than truth? And the object of knowledge is what exists, and its function to know about reality. To sum up, Solon did go to Egypt, where he met with priests at the temple of Neith at Sais, who told him the Atlantis story. Solon was shown sacred records of the Atlantis story and had them translated into a document from Egyptian into Greek. Solon returned to Athens, where his document became available to Plato. Plato based the Timaeus and Critias dialogues on Solon's document. Plato is not a character in the Timaeus and Critias dialogues, but he uses the honourable names of Solon and Socrates to confirm the truth of the Atlantis story. The Timaeus and Critias dialogues were studied and debated at the Academy in Athens for at least 10 years while Plato was alive and head of the school. They were studied for centuries after Plato died. This ends the first video. I hope it has shown you that Plato could not have made up the Atlantis story. Plato strongly believed it was an accurate history of more ancient times forgotten by the Greeks of his time. The next video describes the nature of Plato's Atlantic island.